First of all, hello,
Cool.
Dr. Robert Peters.
Hello.
All right, we got Nathan Collins in the house, Dr. Robert Peters. Folks, we've really been working with districts all across the country, and there's been just this, this enormous, in some cases, need, and in some cases, fear around artificial intelligences. And we've got, I'd say, an expert. I mean, someone is really on the cutting edge. He is in collaboration, has his own Spotify around artificial intelligence, specifically. How can artificial intelligence, as educators, how can take that and actually help us do our jobs better, maybe even in reducing as far as time management. And then we're going to be kind of talking about, Nathan is really going to be telling us about how you can use artificial intelligence to really strengthen those lessons, make those future focused lessons. So we got a couple questions for Nathan, but Nathan, before we jump in, man, talk to the family, man. Tell them about your background, man, how you even got into this thing called artificial intelligence.
Right. Okay. So, well, like I exist in a weird space in education.
Sure.
I came to education a little bit later in life after I've done some other, creative projects. Obviously, I'm a elder hipster millennial.
Mm-hmm. Say
I've
that
got the
again. I like
uniform
that. You're
today.
what?
An
Say that.
elder hipster millennial. So,
Oh man, we need like another
yeah.
time just to walk through what that means, right? I
Right.
like that, man.
Right. Yeah. So, I pursued music for a while. I did
Sure.
music teaching. I pursued an advanced education. I got my master's in English lit. And that is going to come into play a little bit here. But
Mhm.
part of the magic of AI that really drew me in was right when ChatGPT came out. And I'm going to share this story once we get into the slide. But right when it came out, I saw the potential immediately for a couple of things that were really exciting. One was just helping me think through planning lessons. Like that in
Right,
and of itself was huge. And
right,
then it was also something that I could teach students how to use it, and they could dig deeper into texts and do really high level synthesis, like almost like a scaffold. You know how we
right.
talk about scaffolds in education a lot, and I see AI as the ultimate scaffold
I love that.
because it will meet students exactly where they're at, and you can ramp it up and bring them into really high level material and ideas, um, pretty easily, successfully. And those were the things that were immediately exciting about me. Now, there was also a grieving process around that because it takes a minute to realize that your knowledge, your
Right.
specialization, that you are, that's you, that's your identity, is the AI can do 70-80% of that where it's at right now, and this is the
Right.
worst version we'll have.
Right.
It's
Right.
right at the beginning, so the potential is limitless, but you have to let go of some things,
Definitely.
in terms of teaching that's hard to let go of.
Right.
So
And
yeah.
as a matter of fact, man, you almost answered the first question, which I
Yeah,
mean, like,
getting in there.
how
I'm
is it
getting in
like?
there.
Has it really changed your philosophy, your teaching, right? Of how how
Totally.
it's it almost requires you, and we can talk through it. It gives you kind of the framework, right? Like
Yep.
as educators, we work so hard on preparing students on this framework, and then we then work on these steps of building or applying or synthesizing this. Like AI,
Hmm.
it gives you like this framework already, right, for you to kind of build
Hmm.
on, right? So as I
Totally.
hear like how it's changed your teaching practices and philosophies, man. I mean, any additional examples of that?
Oh, totally. So I'll
Mhm.
I'll I'll just jump right in here.
Mhm.
So the way I am been thinking about it, how has AI changed your teaching philosophy and practices, right? That's our first question that we're really
For
meditating
sure.
on here. And the thing I think this has the most to do with is like your identity as an educator. That's what it's coming
Mm.
at,
Yes,
right?
sir.
And that's, I think, why people are responding to it as though it's a threat in some ways. So for
Mhm.
me, it does start with
For sure.
identity and how you identify yourself as an educator. So
For sure.
my first experience, this is the humbling story. This is Henry David Thoreau over here.
Mhm.
And this is my guy. I did my master's thesis on him, and I was
Okay.
PhD track.
Right.
but I wanted to get into the classroom a little sooner than the PhD path really, and so I pivoted there. But like this is my homeboy.
Mm-hmm.
So like we
So
started
Ro is your
out.
homeboy. I love it.
He is,
I love
and
it.
I was teaching transcendentalism. I was teaching Thoreau. I was teaching some Emerson. And I should give you some context. So this is
Hmm.
in a dual enrolled high school class. So I'm
Okay.
on a high school campus, but I'm actually adjunct professor teaching a college level course to high school students.
Okay.
So I've built that program at my school, not to flex too hard, but yeah, I figured that out and made that work and made that connection happen. The community college we paired with hadn't ever done that before.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I'm teaching this high level material. I had made all these, really interesting lesson plans. I was really proud of it.
Hmm.
And then my colleague Jake comes over and he's like, "You gotta check this out." I think that his only words out of his mouth were "bruh." And then he sits down next to me and he's like, "Okay, what are you teaching this week?" And I was like, "Okay, I'm teaching all this stuff. I'm teaching this
Hmm.
specific essay. I'm doing these activities." And he's like, "Let's just see what ChatGPT can do."
Right.
And so he just gave the language model he queued up transcendentalism in its repository in its brain. He was a little more advanced at prompt engineering at that point. I mean, this was like 2 weeks in,
Hmm.
and the AI spit back almost exactly what I did in my class in terms of lesson plans, like
Right.
activities, and it gave me like a few ideas that would have been really cool that I actually like looked at and was like, oh, I should have done that, or I
Right.
should have thought of that.
Hmm.
So it wasn't that like I didn't have the expertise or that my lessons were bad, right?
Right.
It was that I could have created them much faster, much easier, and also it would have given me a different perspective because I'm locked into
Exactly.
my one viewpoint.
Right.
And then by interfacing with the AI, it gave me some lateral thinking. So I
Hmm.
think what we're talking about here is like, how do you identify? Do you identify with like the content you're teaching?
Right.
Because a lot of teachers are really loyal to that. They're very close to their hearts. But the process of how you are teaching and the skills that you're teaching,
Right.
that's what's always more important. And so
Exactly.
as it takes this like identity shift to be like, okay, I need to focus more on skills and more on process for my students, but also for myself.
Right.
And sometimes that's a hard shift
It
for
is.
educators to make.
It is, man.
It's
It
it's
is.
it's threatening who you are, right?
Right.
Like this
Right.
is my expertise, and it's coming for that, and that's a threat. But
Definitely.
I don't
Definitely.
think we should see it that way. You can
No, we can't.
enhance what you're already doing.
Man, we can't see it that way, because I mean, when
Yeah.
we think about it, I mean, a lot of, Dr. Daggett really talks about this shift from content to skills, right? And as we,
Yep.
as we're progressing as a nation, man, it's all about skills and the skills that children are going to
All about
need
skills.
as they progress in this new society and what this society is going to look like in their future, right? It's
Hmm.
not necessarily about the
Exactly.
content that we love,
No.
right, in our past, but
Yeah.
about these futuristic skills that children need, man. So that's great. Definitely talk with us about
Hmm.
some pieces that you've actually done, man. I know that we had the opportunity
Yeah.
maybe last week to talk through some of those lessons, but give us some
Totally.
really
Yeah. Yeah.
cool
Yeah.
lessons that you've used AI in your classroom to work with your students with.
Totally. Let's jump
Mhm.
into that. Let's see what I got. Yeah. So what am I teaching? Process over product, right? And identify with the process. If you can
Right,
come to do that and identify with, I'm going to be creative, I'm going to think through new challenges, and I'm going to teach my students how to do that. If you can
right,
identify with that more than your content, it's always better. So let's get to some lessons. I kind of combine these examples of effective AI integration and how can
sure,
AI assist other teachers. So getting into it, some of the ways that I've been using it is AI enhanced annotations.
okay,
So again, this is a, college level writing course, like your freshman comp is what
sure,
I'm teaching. So a
sure,
lot of that, you're teaching basic academic research practices, right?
hmm,
And you're trying to teach a high level kind of synthesis
sure,
where they can take information from multiple different sources and put it together, make a claim, an argument, an exploration of an idea, right?
okay,
And so what I began to see is that AI had the potential to be dialectical. That's what
Sure.
I was thinking about because I was reading kind of in a Socratic method kind of way. You can go back and forth with it and deepen your understanding, and it will share with you different perspectives. So
Sure.
here's a good example. So this is what I've been working on this so far this semester. So
Hmm.
this is my example text set. I have these three great essays that I really like to use. One's Charles Cooley's Social Consciousness from 1902, turn of the century. He's talking about early in American industrialization, right? And there were a lot of really bad practices around that, sweatshops in New York, and he's
Right.
really identifying how the system that we're creating is tough and it needs to be more human.
Right.
Walter Benjamin, Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, 1935. He's talking about how, again, so now art had become reproducible by machines, not just
Sure.
industrial stuff, but uh, actual artwork
Sure.
through he was worried about photography and worried about cinema, like,
Right.
and he's kind of making a meditation on that. And then I have this other essay that I added on to called A Case Study of Innovation by Elting E. Morrison, and this is in 1950.
Hmm.
And this essay goes deep on how as a society, as a culture, we are resistant to innovation. We are
Right.
resistant to change, and it is because we identify with the product more than the
The process.
process,
Exactly.
right? So that's where he's getting. So I kind of like these are three very, very different texts. They're written very differently.
Hmm.
Charles Cooley's like grandfather of sociology, so his
Right.
is more academic. Walter Benjamin's kind of a social critic. He's talking about like fascism, rise of
Right.
fascism at that time.
Right.
And Elting is kind of looking back. He's a historian. And he's like,
Hmm.
well, in the military, is his case study is that they were resistant to changing the way they were doing things.
Hmm.
So I put all these together, right? And I had kids do annotations on each of these.
Hmm.
But I wanted them to be able to see the progression from the turn of the century to the 50s during this
Right.
period of intense technological innovation, right? So I wanted to try with Claude. This is an example from Claude, and this is like English Professor Unlocked, right?
Right.
This prompt, this is a prompt for me
Right.
at
Right.
this
Right.
AI. And I was like, I wonder if it can take it. I don't know.
Right.
So it's this really long kind of analysis of the first two articles. And I wanted to ask it a real question. I did this with my class in real time.
Hmm.
And they, because they were like, well, what is the future? Is it Terminators? We just want to
Right.
know if it's Terminators,
Right.
right?
Right.
So like I'm like, well, let's ask it. Let's knowing what we know from these articles, let's see what it identifies. And so
Hmm.
I had it read the two PDFs. It did that beautifully, and then it gave me this response. And he says the challenges are great. This is Claude, but so is the potential if we have the courage to transform our social consciousness. So it was able to pull in those things from Cooley and Benjamin. So what gives me hope is seeing these people shine light on these issues decades ago. We can learn from the past to create a human-centered AI future. Because of
Right.
course, the challenges of integrating AI is huge, but it's going
Hmm.
to happen. It's
Right.
just when and where and how, and we need to start learning how to use this tool and teaching kids how to use this tool.
Sure. Sure.
So I pushed it a little further. I gave it the Elting, and this was actually before I even read it because I wanted to annotate it in real time with my students to like
Right.
show them how I would walk through an essay. And it gave these great breakdown points of synthesizing Benjamin and Cooley and Morrison, and it grounded all of Morrison's claims with stuff from Cooley and Benjamin that I hadn't even seen. I was just because it mentions here at the end, like, oh, it says it's a detailed case study, and this enriches the theoretical arguments. Like, you're
Sure.
right. That would be good to ground it in practice, right? And
Right.
so this is some high level synthesis
Right.
that I could coach the AI into, and by feeding it, cool pieces of content, and then
Hmm.
breaking down all of the processes of how do you synthesize these ideas.
Definitely.
And it was really cool to see students do that. So students were following along with me this whole process, and this is me kind of priming them to learn how to prompt engineer on their own.
Right.
But the thing that we drew out of this process and all of this synthesis, and these are these ideas that may have not been accessible to them
Right.
without having AI break it down and make those connections and help us make all those connections together. So they pulled this out of the Morrison. This was one of the favorite quotes that's got shared a couple times. This was shared by Eliza. She says the tendency, and I'm teaching them, citation here too. This is a
Right.
trick. Like cite your sources, right?
Right.
So tendency is apparently involuntary and immediate to protect oneself against the shock of change by continuing in the presence of altered situations, the familiar habits, however incongruous, of the past. So bringing that past into the present, even when it no longer applies. And so we applied that to students' identities in schools. And
Right.
these are the notes that I had on the board that I was talking from actually, like at
Right.
our last meeting that I had done from that lesson that day. So all this came out of that whole class conversation we ended up having.
I see.
So what students were able to identify is that school, as it is right now, is very product focused. They're
Right.
like grades, achievements. They teachers care about product a lot of the
Right.
time. They don't value the process as much, and our grading schemes all are set up that way most of like in most contexts.
Right.
So they were identifying, well, if you look more at process, then what's important? Human intention is important.
Right.
Discovery, the process of discovery, is important. You have to carry within you intrinsic motivation in order to participate in process, right?
Mhm.
It's not just I have to get this done. It's I have to explore these ideas. And pursuit of knowledge ties into that too. They're like, oh, well, if you're focusing on process, then pursuit of knowledge is what's valued because knowledge is power, right?
Right.
And then it also encourages you to think laterally, like think about problems in a different way, make connections where there might not have been before, play with ideas. Um, so that was really exciting for me to see that
Oh
uh,
man, that
go
is
through
like
that progress.
we talk about what does a future focused lesson look like, right?
Hmm.
And I think that this
Yeah.
has a lot of those pieces because you're using three articles and then taking children through this way of how you take these three articles and then you get the patterns and you begin to apply those patterns and then at the end then the students begin to synthesize this information to come up with, in your case, the product and the processes, right? So
Hmm.
on a very basic lesson, children would have just read three articles and answered a couple questions around those articles, right? That is a
Exactly.
very basic
Exactly.
lesson, and a lot of people would have been like,
Yeah.
"That's a pretty good lesson," right? And maybe at the end of
Right.
that, had maybe
Yeah.
one. What are patterns that you see out of all three of these articles, right?
Yeah.
But if AI can already do that for you, then you can then begin to take that information and then take that up a notch as far as how you push your students about the skills that they'll get out of that lesson, of how then things that I need to know as far as intention, this kind of this internal motivation, these pieces, man. So this is a very, very strong lesson, Nathan.
Yeah.
And
It was
when a
cool.
lot of
I
people say,
really
what
enjoyed
does
it.
what does a great lesson look like? I mean, this lesson, I love the way that you process through it as well. Definitely, man. Definitely, brother.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I had a lot of fun. Like for me, it's like let's play. Right.
Right.
I've read all this stuff, but it's like how do I get those ideas to students so that they can use them, so that they can do something with them, so that they can own those ideas.
Okay.
And that's rather than just understand them. Like if I'm
Sure.
just getting them to understanding, that's not really what I want. I want
Right.
them to be able to do something with the information and actually like own that.
Love it.
Um, so yeah, that's where I got with that. And after that, let me see, what was my next one? Oh yeah, so here's another example. So
Okay.
I did this just yesterday.
Okay.
So we got to the end of the Morrison, right? And then we're starting to go into Plato because I want them to understand the philosopher king idea because I
For
think
sure.
it's
Sure.
pretty relevant in terms of AI.
Hmm.
Like I'm like, you guys, at some point, there's probably going to be some very important decisions being made by AI
Sure.
that we just have to come to terms with that.
Exactly.
And Plato, lays out that kind of framework of the best possible ruler would be not human, basically, like a philosopher king who
Right.
had no stake in human culture or society.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm getting them in that process. This is book 10 from the Republic. And this was a cool activity. So I mentioned AI enhanced annotations. So I did this model of teaching them how to prompt engineer and get at high level ideas easier, but I hadn't just let them loose on a piece yet.
Yeah, sure.
And I just did this yesterday. It was so cool. So I gave him this just, book 10 dry, and then
Hmm.
was like, what do we know about annotations? Go through, find things that you don't understand, find
Sure.
things that sound interesting to you. And then what I want you to do, and I had them all register for either Claude or ChatGPT using their school email because I
Hmm.
wanted them to have access on their own. And I was like, when you hit a wall, copy that section, those
Hmm.
few lines, put it into Claude or ChatGPT, ask it to explain it to you, just the basics of prompt engineering. Ask
Right.
questions, start to
Right.
have a dialogue with it, and get to a point where the response makes sense to you. And then
Exactly.
copy and paste that response back as your annotation and comment.
I
You
like
can add
that.
your own comments too, but I wanted at least something from AI to be
Right.
enhancing their understanding. So there's some really cool stuff in here. These are really hard ideas to get at, especially from
Right.
this translation. Like, this is hard to understand. I
Exactly.
was just like, this is translated from ancient Greek, you guys. It's like really difficult to access material. And they're like, oh, he's talking about these ideas. He's talking about forms. He's talking about, how things may not be what they seem,
Right.
and how we can be very easily deceived when rhetoric, right, is
Hmm.
very emotional and appeals to emotion. And so they're like immediately able to access the ideas in this
And
section.
I
And
love
this
that.
was one class period. We all jigsawed this and all did it together, and then synthesized everything at the end. Like, what was it actually say?
I love it.
Um, and they got there, and it was way cool. So, like, that's also the speed that I can
Right.
get at really high level ideas and
Right.
translate them down, because I don't have to scaffold everything for each individual student in their own
Exactly.
way. The AI can do it for me
I
in
love
real
that,
time.
man. Right. I love that. I mean, like you're looking at Plato's Republic, but all the way into early childhood, a lot of children have problems with vocabulary. I'm even thinking about my
Yes.
own child, right? When I say, son, what's the meaning of it? He if he gets the definition and the definition is a word that he doesn't really understand, it's real hard for him to understand the
Right.
definition of the word because he doesn't understand the words in the definition, right? But if you're
Yeah,
able to
totally.
take that, put that in AI to bring it down to a level where children understand it, then they can understand any type of writing, whether,
Yep.
I wish
Yep.
I had this when I was in high school, right? I mean, I'm thinking about the high
Dude.
level writing I
Dude.
had. And, it took me so long to figure out what they're saying, right? Before you're able to
Yes.
figure out
Yes.
how to apply it. So I love this,
Yeah.
because it's almost like differentiation at your fingertips as an educator, right? You
Yes.
know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
you're not necessarily differentiating for the child. The child is differentiating for themselves, brother. Now that's strong, man.
Exactly.
That is strong, man.
Yeah.
Brother,
Yeah, it was cool.
that is very strong to teach children how to differentiate for themselves using AI, man. That's a beautiful concept right there, brother. Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
And like, I'm all about, and I work at a school where that's kind of our mission too, is
Right,
is individualized education as best we can make it individualized, right?
right,
And so we have a little bit smaller class sizes. We, really work with students, to make sure they have all the supports they need as they're
right.
working through in understanding these things. But like this, I see this as empowerment.
Sure.
Like a child can access this and like you said, do it for themselves and bring it down to exactly where they are. Because as
Right,
a teacher, you miss that mark a lot until you get to the point where, oh, okay, I see the light bulb, I see the understanding happening.
right.
Um, but yeah, not every teacher is in a position like I'm in, and not every teacher has the time
Sure,
to do that. Like, if you were looking at a classroom of 30, 35, 40 kids even,
sure. You
there's no
can't.
way to
It's no
differentiate
way.
on this level for every student.
Right.
Uh,
And man, I was thinking about like the implications of it. It is almost like then you can have high level, this high level reading like a Plato's Republic. that
Hmm.
seventh graders can actually get an understanding of, because they
E-
can bring it down
easily.
right,
Yep.
so that is
Yeah.
even like this high level writing. No matter how
Yeah.
high it is, you can still bring it down where even younger children can get an understanding of it, synthesize it, and have a
Yeah.
lesson over something that has been in the past, a level that those children
Yeah.
just wouldn't have an understanding of, man. Definitely.
Unobtainable, man.
Oh, brother,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
strong.
It was really cool. There was actually a student because I was like, well, try to ask it to explain it to you as though, like, that's a
Right,
good prompt engineering technique. So I'm like, ask it to explain it to you as though you're 12 years old or as if you're
right,
5 years old, right? And there was one kid that was like, okay, 5 years old is too much. It's talking about like silly people in the silly city. And like, he was like,
right,
we gotta go a little higher
right,
for that.
right,
But
brother.
yeah,
Hey,
it was
look,
able to scale it really
I
well.
love it, brother. Any additional examples that you have before we kind of conclude with,
Oh man,
what
I got
advice would you give?
totally. So let's
Hmm.
see. This was advice. I transitioned to advice. There's another example I want to save for the end because it's very
Okay.
cool.
All
It's
right,
very
man. What
cool.
advice would you give me?
So,
And if I'm a new
so what
teacher,
advice?
brother, I'm listening to this and I say, you know what? I want to try this thing called AI. What advice would you give us?
Totally.
Hmm.
So at first, I have kind of an example.
Hmm.
So this is the podcast, right? And this is where we all started. And we were talking about, is AI going to terminate education or is it going to
Right.
transform education? And I
Right.
think that's an important just mindset shift to have. Like transform. Think of it as a transformative practice. Like
Right.
anything that you're doing can be either made easier and faster for you
Hmm.
or scaled to students more effectively in an individualized way for each
Sure.
student. So that's just kind of a mindset I advise you, but start with fun. So this actually is supposed to be a video. There it is. Okay, so context for this. I was at a professional development meeting to start the year, right?
Hmm.
And we're supposed to get in groups and get to know each other. And uh, so I was like, yo, let me show you the power of what this can do.
So
So
for
I had ChatGPT make a script for us. I had it do a shot to shot list. I had it write a like what characters we were. And so the idea was that we were all going to be in a rock band together on the road and
hmm.
in an Almost Famous kind of way, that movie, and just do kind of like a band documentary spoof for
Hmm.
this, and it was really fun. It was really funny. We have here, I'm going to turn it down, but like these are all teachers at my school, like hanging out and, just having a good time. Like we got to have fun because we didn't spend, and we only had like an hour to do this. So we there's a voiceover narration I do over this. It's real funny, but like we just got to spend time having fun with what we could create with it. Made a band logo for us, the
Right.
whole thing. So it created this story and we really like bonded in a way I don't think we could have done. So I think I think that like he's the tour manager right there. So I think that like starting with fun is a good way to go. Like
Right.
this was basically, kind of an icebreaker activity almost,
I
but it
see.
became this whole other story that was just really cool and we just got to have fun doing it. So that's where I kind of start. Like start with something that's just like that you maybe you would want to do. Like if you want to start a podcast or you want to do some creative things, it can really help simplify those processes for you and give you
Right.
a point of entry. So like
Definitely.
this was super cool. So then we here was the background. We did our shot to shot list. Here's our logo. Like I made all this in like 20 minutes.
I see.
It was awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, second thing, offload your mundane tasks. So this is what, with my fellow colleagues at this school, this is the biggest thing that I see hook them
Right.
is gradebook comments. Let's talk gradebook comments. You
Right.
have, you want to be able to give good comments in the grades. You want to be able to give students really thoughtful feedback. And I know Jake is a little more advanced on this. He has some really cool techniques that he is using to give really immediate feedback.
Sure, sure.
to students that I definitely want to get better at that. At
Hmm.
the level I'm teaching at, it's a little hard, but
Hmm.
I can see a way. But in terms of doing your gradebook stuff, like all I had to do was go back and forth, in that Socratic dialectic way of what I wanted it to do, like
Right,
establishing what my purpose was and what kind of comments I wanted, like what kind of tone I wanted.
right.
And then I could just really, really quickly write in, you know, student's first name, what they accomplished this year. And so this student, Bree, graduated. She did great. She was kind of a shy kid, but
Right.
was really smart. And I wanted her to have a really thoughtful comment. So I threw that in and then turned this into this beautiful comment that would have taken me way longer to write.
Right.
And I don't think would have been any better. It's like I
Exactly.
gave it the structure and the tone of what I wanted, and then just some basic information about the student, and it was able to give some great feedback for them um, on their accomplishments.
Definitely.
And then grow in your professionalism. This one's pretty cool. So I'm presenting at Q this year. This is my Q conference proposal.
Hmm.
And I was like, hey, this rubric is tough. If you've looked at the so Q stands for Computer Using Educators. It's a professional community practice
Right.
um, around technology, and it's a tough rubric. It's like
Right.
very, very intense, and so I wanted some help with that. I wanted
Right.
to get my presentation in there. I wanted to talk about podcasting and making videos and doing that in classrooms because I think
Hmm.
it's really important for students to express themselves too. And I was able to feed it the rubric, and then it was walking me through it. It asked me what I wanted to accomplish. And
Right.
then I, wrote this detailed description here at the bottom. But then it was able to walk me through all the pieces of the rubric. So, say you're wanting to like increase in your professionalism and take that next step, but you don't quite know how to do it. You might
Right.
have been out of the game for a little while. It can help you get there too. Like it can help you
Right. Right.
succeed. It's
Yeah. Not
exciting,
only just your children,
exciting
it can help
time.
you succeed as well. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then, okay, so just to kind of summarize, back to the idea of it as a dialectical machine.
Hmm.
So, in order to get it working for you, you have to start by asking it for help.
Right.
Basically, it's just like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, this is the role that I'm in, to get it to queue up a lot of that information. And then actually being able to go back and forth with it, that gets the process started. And so that's what I'm trying to teach students to do. And I'm just in the beginnings of that, but I'm very excited to see where it can take us and excited with the results I've seen so far. The
Man,
only thing I am always saying that like you have to keep the human in the loop, and I think that comes
right.
from AI exchange. There needs to be somebody in there that's checking it that knows enough. You don't have to be an expert, but as long as you know enough to know what's wrong,
Exactly.
then you'll be okay.
Right.
Like
Right.
you
Definitely.
see, that's where students go sideways with this is they don't know what's
Right.
wrong, and then they can get a little off track, so they need a little guidance.
I see.
Keep a human in the loop, and then learn and play, make, repeat. Like
I like that, brother.
innovate with it.
I love
The
that.
last thing, I know I'm taking up a lot of your
No,
time,
no, no,
but
no,
this
no.
is
I love it,
exciting.
man. Take your time, brother. Take your time, man.
This is yeah, this is the last one. So
No,
this
no,
is
this
the
is
one I'm
good.
really
This is good.
excited about.
Talk to me.
So this was that lesson I was talking about that I haven't done yet, but I really want to do.
Okay.
Um, so I took, and this was when I was just starting to play with Claude.
Hmm.
I took a huge data set from data.gov
Okay.
of mental health statistics across the country. And it couldn't handle the whole data set in one go. If I had broken it up into multiple pieces, it could,
Hmm.
because this one can really read. Claude can read, man. So I broke it down. I think it was like a third of the data set, but that was still thousands of entries on an Excel sheet. And I asked it to explain the data to me. This is just where I started.
Hmm.
So I asked it to explain the data and like what is it seeing? What percentages of demographics are like missing out on care? Like what areas of the country, right? To just to think through like how is mental health care working in the United States? Can it process all of this data? And I
Right.
was like, can we correlate some different things? Can we find, like an area where people aren't really focusing, an area where we could do some new research maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it really blew my mind. So I got down to the point where it started suggesting things like, well, this is an emerging field studying social media and social media like language. It could do language analysis is what it was
Mm-hmm.
proposing, to focus on like what stigma there is on social media around pursuing any mental health like care for
Right.
different age groups and different demographics. So then I was like, okay, so how could I further research that? How could I get into that field? And then it's like, here you go. Here are some universities, programs, and researchers that would be good fits to pursue doctoral research is what I was asking it for. But even for like a student, right?
Right.
I don't know what my future is. I don't
Right.
know where I'm at. And so I also have a caseload of about 20 students in my program that I'm
Okay.
basically their guidance counselor
Right.
too. And that's kind of part of our model. It's called a personalized learning teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So those 20 kids, I see them through their whole high school career and I advise them all the way. And sometimes it's really hard to set goals with
Right.
students or to translate what they're interested in into future possibilities.
Right.
So thinking about careers, thinking about things that they might be excited about, but they don't know that it actually connects
Exist.
to research,
Right.
to an industry, right? And they've struggled to make those connections. And then as me, I also struggle to make those connections. I
Right.
took my own path. I don't know everything about
Right.
uh, all the emerging fields, out there. And so this kind of blew my mind in that way, where it was like you could imagine even just possibilities for your future, and
Exactly.
AI can help you do that and point you in a direction that would be exciting and interesting to you.
Right.
Um, that you could own, that would align with who you feel you are and what you
Right.
want for your future. Like, it's just really cool. So this is a lesson I wanna start doing this with students, but I haven't
Right.
yet. But the potential is just amazing. And
Man,
that's it. That's all I
no,
had.
no, no, brother. You've given us more than enough. I mean, really, in summary, I mean, this is kind of this great self leadership lesson, right? It's this way that
Hmm. Yeah.
children kind of can explore, their own interest, and then begin to look at, okay, use AI to really look at the possibilities. And a lot of the
Yep.
times, I've got a 9 and 11-year old. If I said, baby, what do you want to do when you grow up? She's only thinking about things that she knows. I want to be a dentist, she said that. I want to be an attorney
Hmm.
like mommy. I want to do this. But then I
Yeah.
think that, man, this is extremely important because you can use AI to kind of open up your possibilities, right? And
Totally.
assist you in your own self identity, self knowledge, and your personal goals going forward, brother. So, Nathan, I want to thank you, man. I want to thank you, man. You've given us a lot of good
Thanks.
information.
Of course.
Some amazing examples, man. And you know, what I've seen is maybe in like the last 3 weeks that I've talked to people, maybe in the last 6 weeks, how this is just growing and it's evolving, right?
All
Chat
the time.
GPT is like, that's like little league now, right? Because
I know.
there's so many different apps out there. So even if you say Chat GPT, people are like, well, no, I don't use Chat GPT anymore. I use this and I use this, and it's
Hmm.
evolving. But as educators, we've got to find our entry point, and we've got to evolve with the times, right? The applications will change, but one thing that we talked about was we gotta jump from content to skills. This can give us all
Yeah.
the content we need. We've got to make sure that we can now begin to work on synthesis and skill development with children, man. So I love the
Yeah.
way that AI is gonna be a paradigm shift to us. And man, I appreciate you kind of talking us through this process, brother. Thank you so much, man.
Oh, totally, Robert. Thank you. Thank you
Definitely.
for having me.